Hello everyone and welcome to .NET Core Central. Last week C# 10 and .NET 6 was released during the .NET conference, and one of the features which got a lot of attention was the minimal API in .NET 6. So in today's video I am going to walk through what is minimal API, how to create them, and what are some of the features in C# language that was added which made it possible to build something like minimal API. So minimal API in a nutshell is a new way of writing the API with minimal code. Now that doesn't mean we have to absolutely use that. The previous way of creating controllers and using controllers are still there. So if you are not comfortable using minimal API, you can still use the .NET 5 way of creating a controller and injecting your dependency and use it that way. But if you are building a quick prototype or you are creating a nano service, I would say an extremely small service responsible for doing just one simple thing, you can use the minimal API for that. Some other languages like Node.js with Express already supports building APIs like that with 3 to 4 lines of code. And in today's video, I'm going to show how to create an API with just 4 lines of code and then improve that to use some of the advanced features. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a console application. I'm going to name it as minimalapi.demo. And here, as you can see, I installed Visual Studio 2020. Visual Studio 2020 is what provides support for .NET 6 out of box. And it has changed some of its user experience. For example, here now you can select the version of .NET which will tell what type of version it is. For example, 2.1 is out of support, 3.1 is long term, 5 is the current, 6 is also long term support. So I'm going to continue using .NET 6 and create the console application. Once the application is created, you will see that it comes with a single line, which is console.writeLine. Now this is nothing new. This is something which was introduced in .NET 5, where you do not need to have a program class and main method inside the program.cs. You can just write code and the compiler will understand that everything is inside the main method. So this is the same concept which is carried forward. Though one thing which is different is you don't see any using statement here. The reason for that is with .NET 6 there is a concept of implicit using, and by default implicit using is enabled, which means for most of the common using statement we don't have to write them. The compiler will automatically add those. So that is a very handy feature, will minimize the number of using statement we have to use. And the other thing you'll see that the nullable now is by default enabled in .NET 6, which was not the case for .NET 5. We had to manually enable it in .NET 5. So these are a couple of small feature changes, whereas this is very impactful and a new one. So let's get back here. I'm going to delete everything. So as I said, before I start working on the minimal API, there are a couple of features I wanted to talk about which are needed for minimal API. And both the features are related to lambda. For lambda, whenever we have to declare a lambda, we have to use the type of the delegate during declaration. So for example, if we have to have a function which takes an integer and returns a boolean, we have to declare it with a func. And here it will take an integer and return a bool. And then let's say this is a function which is going to find out if a number is greater than 10. So it's greater than 10, and then we can define this function. And as you can see, the IntelliSense has significantly improved in this new version of Visual Studio. There's a lot of suggestion which is showing up, which did not used to be the case for previous version. So here what we can do is we can say value x, and as you can see it just automatically shows you. I can just do a tab, and if greater than 10, so I'm just going to say it's greater than 10. Just based on the name, it identified that I'm doing a greater than expression and it just created it. This is pretty cool. So you can see that now in the C# 10, what we can do is we can explicitly define the type of the parameter. So I can do like this. And when I explicitly define the type of the parameter, I do not have to use this delegate anymore. I can just say var. And when I say var, you can see that the compiler has automatically inferred the type of the delegate, and we did not have to. If I get rid of this, it's going to throw an error saying it cannot infer the type, but if I put this, it can infer the type. And this is something which will be one of the crucial thing that we need when we start using minimal API. And the next thing is also now we can define a return type for the lambda in the expression itself. So this is one of the feature which will be used when creating minimal API. So it is important that we talk about it. The next feature is in all the previous version of C# and .NET, we could use an attribute only with class or method. We could never use it with lambda. In this version of C#, we can use attribute in the lambda expression. And this is also one of the features which will be heavily used when creating minimal API. So for that, let me create a new attribute class and let me name it as test attribute. And once I do that, there is another important thing you'll see is that once I say colon, it automatically understands that I am trying to derive from the attribute just because I named it as attribute. So the artificial intelligence for IntelliSense has been improved significantly. I'm going to get rid of these namespaces. Now another feature which is not related to the minimal API but extremely powerful is now the class do not have to be inside curly braces for the namespace. The namespace can be declared at a file level like this, and then we can get rid of the curly braces, and that would save a lot of real estate in the horizontal of the class, and I think it's pretty important and helpful. So let me get it to the next line. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare an action delegate here, and let's say it takes a string, and I'm going to name it as action, and it's going to take the string input here, and it will just do console.writeLine of x. And now for this particular x, I can add an attribute. So I can add the test attribute here, and I'll have to add the namespace, and now I can add the test attribute here. Now another cool feature which is also added as a part of .NET 6 is that namespaces do not have to be declared in every class. Apart from having the implicit namespace, the namespaces which are not added implicitly can be added in a separate class as global namespaces, and every class will automatically get those. So if I create a new class here and I call it as global namespaces, and I can just copy this one here and add a global in front of it, and now I don't have to declare the namespace here. So now what I can do is I can go ahead and call the action and pass hello world to it, which should print hello. And then I can do console.writeLine and call the is greater than 10 and pass, let's say 11 to it. And now if I run this application, it should print hello world and then true as a part of the response. Yeah. Now let's go ahead and create the minimal API. And for creating the minimal API, I'm going to change the SDK here from Microsoft.NET.SDK to Microsoft.NET.SDK.web. I'm going to save it. And once I save, it detected that I changed it. So it wants me to reload the project. So I'm just going to go ahead and reload the project. And once the project is reloaded, you'll see that the properties is added, which has the launch setting. And in dependency, it would add the ASP.NET Core.app as a framework. So now we can go ahead and start writing the minimal API. And for that, as I said, we could write a minimal API with 4 lines of code. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing we'll do is we'll declare a builder, just like we used to do in the previous version, but we will use web application dot create builder and pass the arguments, which is the arguments part of the main method, which is not visible anymore, but it is magically injected by the framework. So we call that, and then I can say var app equal to builder dot build and then app dot run. But before app dot run, I'm going to say app dot I need to declare minimal API. So this is where I'm going to declare the minimal API, and for that I'm going to use the method map get. And if I do the map get, you can see that it takes string pattern for the URL and delegate handler. So for the string pattern, I'm going to say /API/user, and then for the delegate, I can just create a simple delegate and declare an object which I'm going to return. That's about it. As I said, just 4 lines of code, and now we have an API ready. And if I go ahead and select this and run the application and go to /API/user, I can see ID and name showing up as expected. As you can see, just 4 lines of code and we have our API ready. But this API is not very useful, of course, because this is not how we're going to do anything. We'll probably be having a class which is going to get the data from a database and it is going to return. So let's create a class called user provider. But for the simplicity and time constraint, I'm not going to get into database and do anything right now. I'm just going to return static data from that class. So I'm going to create a user provider. It is going to have a public user array and get. And let's create the user type. And for the user type, let's provide ID, string name, and let's get rid of this to save some space. And same here, we can just get rid of this. Okay, and now here what we can do is we can just do return new and for the user we can say ID is equal to 1, name is equal to Jado. That's it for the time being, and let's create an interface for the user provider. So now what we want to do is we want to use the iUser provider instead of doing this. So let's see how we are going to do it. So first, what we have to do is we have to add the iUser into dependency injection container. So for that, we'll do builder.services, which is going to give the iService collection, and then .add singleton, just like we do usually. We can do that, and here I can say iUser provider and user provider. So now we added this to dependency injection. Now the goal is to pass it along here. So how we are going to do that? So for that, there are a couple of options. One option is you can just use iUser provider, and the framework will kind of do its magic and say, okay, you're asking for iUser provider. Let me see if I have it in my dependency injection container. If I have, I'm just going to give it to from there. Or you can explicitly define an attribute here from service, and it will, and I have to add the namespace for ASP.NET Core MVC. And now it will know that it has to get it from dependency injection container. And here I can just say user provider.get. That's about it. And this one, let's move it to the global namespace and declare it as global. And that's it. Now we created a dependency, injected it, and we are using it as a part of the user. So let's run this. And now here we try again /API/user, and we can see we have this. Now let's say there's another feature which is for Visual Studio, not for the language as such, but there is a concept of hot reload. This is where you don't have to restart the whole program. So if we, let's say, have to add another user to the user array here, we can just do it using this, and we can give the user ID as 2, and that's the Jane Doe. Now instead of restarting, we can just do hot reload, and we can just refresh this, and we can see it showed up. As you can see how fast it was to do a hot reload and show it in the UI, which is very cool. So that is a very easy way to create minimal API. Now the other question you might have is, okay, we saw the get, what about post? And how about reading the data from the post? So let's try that out. For post, let's create a user creator. So let's create a new class, call it as user creator. And for the user creator, let's create public bool create user. And here for the time being, I'm just going to do console.writeLine very simple, and we don't need this because it's part of the global. And then I'll just return true. And then let's go ahead and create a namespace. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come here and add the user creator in the dependency injection. Created the user, we added the user creator to dependency injection. And now just like map get, I can do app.map post. And here I can have the same API/user, and then I'm going to create the delegate. But here what I need to do is, first of all, I need the same thing. I need from service and I user creator, and from services user creator. So that's the first thing. And the next thing I need is the user object as a part of the post body. Now that we can use just like we used to do for the previous version of .NET. We can use from body, and we can say user, and here we can say user creator.create user, and if the user is created, then we want to return OK. Otherwise we want to return a bad request. So how we are going to do it? Let me take it to the next line just for clarity. And here what we can do is we can do just like we had OK and bad request. Here also we can do the same thing from a class called results. So we can do results.OK if the user creation was successful. Otherwise we can say results.badRequest. And that's about it. So let's run it and see it in action. So for seeing it in action, either have to use Postman or I could have used Swagger. So let's go ahead and add Swagger. So for adding Swagger, of course, we need to have the swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core. So for that, I can go ahead and install it in NuGet package, or I can just go ahead and add it in the property group. If I do that also, it will install it as a part of NuGet package in the background. So it would have done that already. Now what we have to do is we have to add the Swagger related extension method to the dependency injection. So for that I'll do builder.services.add point API explorer, which is needed. And the second thing we have to do is builder.services not add controller, we need add swagger gen. So once we add these two, the next thing we have to do is add it to the middleware, and for that we will do app.use swagger and app.use swagger UI. Now swagger UI takes an action and we can do all the things that we usually do in .NET 5. I'm not going to do it here because it's not related to .NET 6 or C# 10. This is standard swagger, so I'm just going to keep it at this. And now I'm just going to run the application. And once the application is started, now if I go to swagger, I can see the swagger API and I can see both post and get. So I'm going to post the user, going to try it out, and I'm going to keep everything as same. And if I execute now, I can see it is a success. And in the console, I could see here user with name string is created. As you can see here, user with name string is created. So the method was called and it successfully worked. Now one thing is that I am throwing a 400, but in swagger here I am not mentioning what I am throwing. But what we can do is we can provide swagger documentation as a part of this request itself. So what we can do here, we can say, first thing is we can specify a name. So we can say with name, and here we can give a name. So this one is create user. And then what we can do is we can say produces. So what does it produces? It produces user array, and when it produces user array, status codes dot okay, and also it produces status code dot bad request. So now if I run this in the documentation, I should see the 400 bad requests showing up, which was not showing up earlier. So now if I do swagger, and if I expand, you can see it is showing 200. When it shows 200, this is how the response is. This is the schema. So I give a user array, which is wrong. It does not produce as user array. So I can change that. So it does not produce an user array. It just gives the status. So I don't need to give it there. I just have to say it either produces OK or 400 bad request. Let me run it again, show you. Yeah, as you can see, it either gives you 200 or 400 bad request. So as you can see, with only 15 lines of code and of course couple of other classes for creating and deleting user, we just completed building a CRUD operation for user. Now to be honest, if we are using an entity framework or a depper for create user and user provider, the code is not going to be very different. It's going to be similar. It's going to be very 3 or 4 lines of code here for accessing DB and 3 or 4 lines of code here for creating the data. So technically between 30 to 50 lines of code will be done creating a microservice which allows you to create user and get user. And I think it is extremely powerful. This is very handy and very useful, and I think it gives a very good chance for developers from other frameworks like Node.js or Python, Node.js with Express and Python with Django to jump in C# and very quickly adapt it with this minimal API. So that's all I wanted to cover for today's video. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you are new to my channel and if you think you are getting value out of my channel, please subscribe to my channel. And thanks so much for watching this video.